The woods is the best place for monsters. Everyone knows that. So when you head out for a camping trip, don't be surprised when something huge, something hungry, comes sniffing around at your flesh. Be prepared for the run of your life. That is, if you have time to run. Enjoy this allegedly true scary story of a possible monster on Native American land. Sorry about the sound quality. I'm still recording with second-hand equipment next to a highway in this hotel, but I'll be back soon to read security guard confessions in a full-length video. So be sure to send your stories at darknessprevails.org soon. By the way, what are some of the strangest things you've heard or seen in the woods? What is the oddest or creepiest story your family has told you about the forest? Let me know in the comments. It Was Mad by Justin V. It happened back in summer of 2014, and it's one of the most frightening and invigorating experiences of my life. I've always been an avid outdoorsman, and I've always loved the woods and camping, and really anything that involved being with nature. During the particular summer, I was thrilled to have met a coworker, a man who loved the outdoors as much as I did. He was half Native American and half white, and people often called him White Bear. He loved it and embraced the name. It wasn't too long after meeting him that he invited me out to go camping on his family's land one weekend. I was exuberant. This parcel of land was over 5,000 acres and had been owned by his Cherokee family for several generations. It had a couple of square miles of nothing but woods and swamp that teemed with game like wild boar, black bear, and white-tailed deer. I met up with him at his house, and before departing for the woods that day, we took an inventory of what we had. A 12-gauge, a Welsh longbow, a few hatchets, a tent, and some food and water. We had plans to track and maybe hunt some game early the following morning. When we arrived at his family's land, we parked my car and hiked a mile or two into the woods. It was beautiful and lush. The forest was loud with birds and smaller animals chirping and whatnot. Eventually, we found what seemed to be the perfect spot for setting up a campsite. White Bear set up with his 12-gauge to see if he could bag a squirrel or something for dinner, while I began to dig a fire pit. Several minutes after digging into the ground, I stopped a minute to catch my breath and wipe the sweat from my face, when I noticed the forest had gone eerily silent and still. Having been in the woods plenty of times before, I knew that when the birds stopped singing, it was a good sign that there was a predator nearby. Without hesitation, I grabbed the longbow, and I waited as quietly as possible, surveying my surroundings meticulously, looking for movement. By that point, the sun was going down, and White Bear had been gone a long time. I thought it was best by then to go looking for him. I was certain he hadn't gone far, but I wanted to make sure he was back at camp before dark. It wasn't long before I found one of his tracks in the mud and began following the trail. I came around this curve in the woods where I couldn't see around the bend due to the fact that it was so dense with brush. As I rounded the thicket, I began calling out to my friend, but received no verbal response. I had been calling out to White Bear for about 30 seconds when the bushes in front of me began to rustle like something big was attempting to pass through them. I called out again to White Bear, thinking it was him, but with no response, I raised the bow with an arrow already notched and drew back, ready to let loose. Eventually, White Bear's head popped out, and he looked at me with a startled expression on his face. "Whoa, man, calm down," he said loudly. I was relieved it was him, and asked why he didn't answer me. He said there were signs of deer in the area, and he did not want to scare them away. We started making our way back to camp just as the sun was setting, and we began to cook some beans and talked about past camping and hunting experiences we had. He and I both had a lot of stories to share, as we both had already seen a lifetime of adventure. As the night went on, White Bear began to tell me some of his family's stories of demonic creatures in the woods that took on the form of wolves and deer, and I was absolutely awestruck, fascinated. I'd never heard of the Wendigo or cryptids before that, nothing besides Bigfoot. After a while, my eyes grew heavy, and I decided it was time for bed. White Bear, however, insisted on staying up, so that we could have someone keeping watch. I remember thinking he was a bit paranoid, but still didn't mind the notion of it, and even said I would take a turn to watch in a few hours. I fell asleep with the peaceful sounds of cicadas and various birds and other insects playing a symphony all around us. It was around 3 a.m. that I awoke to White Bear shaking me. Dazed and feeling like I just awoke from a coma, I was having a hard time realizing what he was trying to say to me. In a whispered tone, he was saying something that I'll never forget. Word for word, it was, "Dude, something is pissed off." I attempted to comprehend what he was saying, but I was still halfway out of it. I finally woke up fully when I heard a sniffing noise just outside the tent. Whatever it was sniffing the air and the ground, one after the other repeatedly. From its snorts, I could tell it was something big, at least the size of a black bear. Just 10 seconds after I was awoken, it began to go ballistic. It stomped loudly like an agitated horse as it trumped around the camp, now snorting loudly. Its snorts were wet, like an animal that had a cold. We sat there listening to it as it circled our tent, until it stopped just 4 feet beside the back of us. The animal seemed to stand still. White Bear and I looked at each other with the same look, to get ready, because we thought it was about to charge at us. White Bear pumped around into his 12 gauge, and I grabbed a blade, and we sat there waiting for what felt like an hour. A cursed hour. I was pumping with adrenaline and excitement, but also a very deep sense of dread, thinking that this could be my last fight. After another minute of silence, I made the choice to yell out, and I mustered every bit of bravado I had in me, screaming in a barbarian-like way. White Bear joined in, and we carried on the screaming and yells and shouts for a few seconds, and then stopped. We heard the animal turn away and start running through the thicket, screeching at the top of its lungs. What made this weird was it sounded nothing like anything we'd ever heard, far from any bear. I remember it distinctly to this very day. It sounded bird-like, but also very guttural. During that moment, my brain was thinking I was listening to a raptor from Jurassic Park. That's honestly the best way I can describe it. We were both frozen in terror as we listened to it crash through the woods as it screeched into the night. It took a few minutes for us to compose ourselves, but once we did, we grabbed our stuff and a flashlight and looked around the camp. Nothing was out of place, and we really couldn't see much of our surroundings due to the forest being so thick, and the moonlight didn't help at all. We crawled back into our tent and set up, talking about what had just happened. Again, we were both very experienced woodsmen, and White Bear was a seasoned hunter. He said he had never heard anything like it. We wondered about the possibility of it being a large wild boar, and that was certainly possible. but that would not explain the screech it had made. There was also the fact that it sniffed the ground and then the air. That behavior is very bear-like, but black bears don't stomp around like that, let alone make a noise from their mouths like that screech. Its movement as well was more akin to a horse. I also mentioned how the animal crashed through the woods as it fled away, with as little grace as possible. It was far too large to be a deer, and the deer here are very shy of humans, because the land is hunted year-round. We did eventually manage to fall back to sleep after a while, and awoke just as the sun was rising. With the morning sun highlighting our campsite, we looked around the area for tracks. We found everything from deer tracks to raccoon prints, and our campsite looked like it had been ransacked. Our food bag had been tied up 12 feet in a small pine tree the night before, but it was now on the ground and scattered. The mud and dirt around us had all been disturbed, but we could find no other tracks. After breakfast that morning, White Bear and I went on a morning hunt before leaving, and everything else was uneventful. Fast forward to a month later, I was over at White Bear's house, preparing for an afternoon at the target range on his land. He was really eager to show me a picture on his computer though, one from his uncle's game camera that had been taken a few days ago. He opened the image, and I could first see that it was taken during the day. At first glance, it looked like a brown smudge of mud on the camera lens that it was taking about 60% of the picture. White Bear pointed it out to me, that what I was looking at was brown fur. He explained a few details of the camera's location, and a slight chill went up my spine. The game camera was 5 feet up the tree, which meant that the animal that fur belonged to was huge. To think we were in the woods with something of that size, that was creepy enough. Thinking back on it now, I remember the stark silence of the woods as if there was a large predator around when White Bear had woke me up. To this day, I'm not certain of what we encountered. It could have very likely been a bear or a deer or even a wild boar. Or it could have been something else. I still will never forget the shrieks and cries it let out, nor the sound of it sniffing the air with that cold sound. This was perhaps my most memorable camping trip, and since then, I don't go deep into the woods, not without my trusted 30-30. Thanks so much for listening to this single story episode. I hope you enjoyed. I can't wait to get back and start sharing some longer videos with you. If you want to be in a future video, you can send me your true scary story at darknessprevails.org. You can send any story, but I am looking for security guard confessions. Anyway, until next time guys, this world is a strange one, so stay safe out there and stay creepy.